Best known for having been the director of planning in San Francisco at a very stormy period in the city's history, from 1967 to 1975. This is the time when downtown San Francisco went through a process which its critics described as Manhattanization in terms of the new high-rise buildings. It was a time when San Francisco and the Bay Area were transformed by the opening of the BART system and many other changes. So because he was the director of planning during those years, Alan Jacobs was really at the center of the action for many of the tough fights that went on within San Francisco about the future of that city. Prior to that time, he earned his Bachelor of Architecture degree from Miami University. He earned his Master of City Planning degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He worked as a planner in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Calcutta. He was a Fulbright Scholar at University College London, a resident in architecture at the American Academy in Rome. He was a Guggenheim Fellow. Many of you, of course, know him as the author of books, or specifically the ENV101 students here were required to read one of the chapters about requirements of great streets. He also is known as one of the first Americans to recognize some of the innovations which took place in Curitiba, Brazil. And during the question and answer period, we might get into some of the lessons from Curitiba, some of Professor Jacobs' experiences working with Jaime Lerner, the former mayor of Curitiba. I personally am very grateful that he's here, because back in the 1970s, when I was a graduate student trying to figure out what environmental design was about, Professor Jacobs was one of my professors at UC Berkeley. I was fortunate he hired me to be a research assistant. He hired me to be a teaching assistant for, I think it was City Planning 110, which was an effort to try to introduce city planning to undergraduates at Berkeley. But it was a really great experience to be able to work with him. I consider him to be not only one of the best teachers I ever had, but also one of the most inspiring planners I ever met. And I still have very vivid memories of being in a classroom with him, watching in awe as he dissected a proposed project in front of me. In fact, as I recall, you taught your students how to ask, I think he gave us a list of something like 10 or 11 questions, almost universal questions to ask in order to understand what a project was all about, in order to understand what are the potential implications for a city, and how do you figure out who the stakeholders are. But I still remember these really masterful examples of understanding how buildings, streets, and cities come together. So when I started teaching, when I started leading a discussion section for ENV101 this quarter, and realized that Great Streets was on the reading list, I thought, aha, at last, a perfect example, a perfect opportunity to invite Alan Jacobs to come here to Cal Poly Pomona for the first time. So would you please welcome Professor Alan Jacobs. So, in 40 years of knowing you, I have never felt comfortable using the name that everybody else seems to use. Everybody refers to him as Jake, and somehow, Alan, I've never gotten used to that, and so I hope you won't mind if I refer to you as Alan during this program this morning.
Let's see how that...
Okay, all right. So let's start from the beginning. I wanted to ask you, how did you get started with all this in the first place? You ended up being trained as an architect and a planner. I'm sure your parents wanted you to be like a doctor or owning a shoe store or being an undertaker or something else. How did you end up discovering the urban environment and deciding that this is the path you wanted to go on?
Great. In undergraduate school, I was doing architecture. By the way, Miami University is Ohio, not Florida. And I was doing architecture, a 5-year undergraduate program, and a guy showed up, Professor Rudolph Harvard, Penn, and North Carolina. And I got in, picked Harvard, went there. While I was there, I had two great professors there. They appointed a new dean, a famous dean, Jose as a new dean. He gave a talk on the roles of the architect. And we all went to hear. He hadn't come yet, he was about to come. And the roles of the architect were three. And one of the roles of the architect was as to be a city planner. And I had been there for about a year already, almost a year. And I asked the question, what was the role of a city planner? The role of an architect could be a city planner. What was the role of a city planner? And he said, well, there was the Litauer school over there, and that's a government, that teaches government. And that would be for the city planners. And I went home that night and wrote a letter to the University of Pennsylvania. Would you take me as a, would you take me now? and they said yes. And so I went to Penn. That's how I graduated from Penn, not from Harvard. That was just fine. And one of the people I had a terrible summer job, just a terrible summer job at the Cleveland Regional Planning Commission. Terrible job. And I was ready to get out of the field. And a guy who kept me in it, he was totally accessible, was Lewis Mumford. And I would go see Lewis Mumford sometimes in the morning, and we would talk. Lewis Mumford kept me in the program. That's how. Then one thing led to another. I had a summer job in Cleveland, and then went to Pittsburgh. After coming back from the Fulbright that Lewis Mumford wrote for me, wrote a recommendation for me. Now I'll go off because I want to, but I can't on a tangent. Many years later, the group I belonged with, and once was president of the People for Open Space in San Francisco, wrote about, did a study that said about how there was plenty of room in San Francisco for all the uses, and you didn't have to take up all that agricultural land, because it's the best agricultural land in the world around San Francisco. And that, I'm proud of the study that we did, and I wrote a letter and sent the report to Lewis Mumford and asked, I hope you remember me. But here's our report. And I got a note back from Mumford that said, of course, dear Jacobs, I remember you. Thank you for the report. If you don't succeed, my ghost will want you. And I put that right up over my desk on the wall, and it was there until I resigned from Berkeley. Anyway.
A great story, and I think a lesson for our students that they need to watch out if they ask a former mentor for advice, that they may be warned that the ghosts of their mentors may follow them.
Wonderful.
Great. Let me follow up with another question. As you can tell, many of our students are relatively young, probably born 20 or less than 30 years ago. So they may not have much of a sense of what America was like back in the 50s and 60s, the formative period when you made many of your career decisions. Can you tell the students here, what was it like in terms of conditions in American cities, and what was how would you describe the status of the design professions in those days when you were in your 20s and 30s trying to figure out what you wanted to do? And what was the environment in American cities like in the 50s and 60s?
Well, it was what was produced. It produced what you have here now. It was people going out, leaving cities. Actually, it was a period of building freeways, beginning of building freeways. It was moving to the suburbs, open space, low density development. That's what it was. And cities were beginning to have a hard time. And there were these new programs that had come online about redevelopment to rejuvenate cities. Terrible programs that would create, that called things slums that weren't slums. I remember those very, very much. And I could never get into, I like cities. I like urban life. And I began to realize most people didn't. None of you, maybe even your parents don't remember the 1939 and 1940 New York World's Fair, where the General Motors Corporation put up a huge, wonderful show where you waited in line forever at the fair and got into little cars, that took you around the world of tomorrow. And you could see it was full of freeways, cars, and in the distance, tall buildings, but it was really a movement of vehicles. Movement of vehicles around and around, in and out, and then all of a sudden there would be a close-up. And I remember that vividly. That was what America was like. It was trying to become that vision. It's a vicious vision. No one knew that at the same time General Motors was doing everything it could to take streetcars off of city streets and replace them with buses because they could produce the buses and they wanted the streets. They wanted the streetcars out of the center of the streets, which is a commanding position on the street, and to give that to the automobile. Buses would take the curbs, so not a commanding position. And they were buying up and doing away, helping to do away with the streetcars. They were killing cities. General Motors was doing that. Interestingly enough, at Harvard, we did some studies of if you built that kind of a city, could it work? And you found out immediately it could not. The traffic produced by the density could not be handled on those roads, no matter what they were. We found that out very early. So that's the joyful things at the time were things that the greenbelt cities we're talking about for planners. The New Towns movement in England, which had become law, to build new cities, central cities. All the stuff from Ebenezer Howard to make it, if you know about Ebenezer Howard, you should, to make cities real, to make little cities, to take and to preserve open space. But no, so those were what planners looked to as the ideal of the time. the same time, the highways were being built, and that was all out of Corbusier. That whole movement. You know, Corbusier was one real son of a bitch in every way. He wanted, when it might have served him to do the new Berlin, he tended to that, to the Nazis. When it could work to do other cities that were under socialist control, then he became a communist. You know, but his plans for Paris were some of the worst plans imaginable, and yet that's what was getting built. That's what people were doing. So the two things, the suburban development and the flight to the suburbs versus urban redevelopment and islands. Cities were different. Some cities were different. And it was fun working in cities. I know I'm being
You're actually leading perfectly to the next question I wanted to ask you. What you've just been talking about, I think, points to both the great opportunities and the great frustration that planners, architects, and landscape architects face in terms of trying to predict the future. You mentioned Garden Cities of Tomorrow. You mentioned General Motors arguing that automobiles were the inevitable wave of the future. And it occurs to me that the challenge is figuring out what really lies ahead in the future and how do we prepare for it. And I want to start talking about San Francisco a bit, but in the context of how do city builders, how do city makers, whether we're planners, architects, or landscape architects, reconcile what we think is going to happen in the future with what we do today. In particular, I want to ask you to talk about the Transamerica building and also about Market Street. But before, let me set it up for you. The point I'm trying to make is, I think it's Peter Hall who wrote a book that was titled Great Planning Disasters, that almost suggests in an almost humorous way that for anybody who tries to create cities, a constant challenge is getting it right in terms of figuring out what lies ahead in the future and what do we need to do. So I think when Peter Hall was talking about great planning disasters, what he was referring to is sometimes the wrong decisions, the wrong assumptions are made about what's coming, and then later we have to pay the price because it was a mistake or even a disaster. Now, getting to your time in San Francisco, I know there are many specific cases we could talk about, but I thought in particular it would be interesting to talk about how the Transamerica Pyramid came about and how you reacted to it at that time, back in the late 60s, I guess, or early 70s. And now, 40 years later, what do you think about it? And I'd also like to come back to Market Street, which you played such a key role thinking about and revisioning back in those days, and now 30 or 40 years later, what lessons there are. So I'd like to get you to talk about how do you deal with the challenge of trying to predict what lies ahead in the future, or what's best for the future, and then talking in case of some specific cases like the Transamerica building or Market Street, or if there are other specific examples you want to bring up.
Well, let's start first in terms of envisioning the future. You do a plan that is, I work for the San Francisco City Planning Department. And it's a good thing if you're working in that situation. You read what you're supposed to do. Why was the City Planning Department created? What was it supposed to do? Well, that's in the charter. It happens to be in the charter of San Francisco. That's like the Constitution of the city. People vote on it. says that it is our job to do a land use general plan of the city that's supposed to deal with land uses, circulation, basically. And we have certain, that we're supposed to do it, the commission is supposed to approve such a plan. And it's supposed to deal with people. If you extend that a little, then it's dealing with people in the city, their well-being. It has to deal with housing, it has to deal with open space. And so you do a plan. Well, the plan I found in San Francisco was just terrible. You know, all highway oriented because transportation engineers had done plans, and the planners didn't argue with it. One freeway after another. That's what you plan. That's what you're supposed to do. And so we didn't have any money to do the whole new plan. So I did it piece by piece. We did housing first because that was so important to the well-being and to deal with having enough to deal with low income and, you know, those issues of social, physical issues. We did, very soon after we did that was the first piece of the master general plan. We did it piece by piece, which sounds a little crazy, but that's what I had money to do. Then there came an ability to do an urban design plan. And I got money to do an urban design plan for the city of San Francisco. And I wanted us, as a staff, to do it. I always preferred doing work by ourselves, the staff.
Without consultancy.
Yeah, or minor consultants, that's right. Why the hell would I give somebody else the work that was fun to do? Why should I do that? That's why I became a city planner, was to do this stuff. So I would do it, and I built up staff to do that. And we did this urban design plan, which was the physical arrangement of the city. That it had to deal with social issues, it had to deal with transportation issues, but relationships of buildings to each other, relationships of building to people, to transportation. We did that. And if you don't know it, then you should. It was a major, major document, a major, major presentation. And people really took to it. And very quickly after we had done it, they began to challenge us. Why is this just another pie-in-the-sky plan? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Those challenges really helped us. And one thing or another, we made an awful lot of what was in that plan into law. So the first height controls all over the city. The first bulk controls all over the city. But most of the plan deals with principles, physical principles of location. And that's important for any kind of a plan. Let's see in the future is principles. Truths, and I mean that in the literal sense. A principle is a truth, accepted as a truth. It's not, we should, it's a truth. We did that, and it was very successful. That leads to, let's say, transparency. Along comes, the plan hadn't been approved yet, yes, it had. Along comes somebody who wants to build a building, this tall pyramid. At the end or beginning, depending on how you look at it, Columbus Street. And he's going to take out a street, an alley to do it. And I was opposed to it. Why? Because the building itself, also the building becomes a huge focal point on Columbus. We made the point in the plan that focal points, major focal points, should be for public or semi-public buildings. A church, a city hall, a library. Those should be focal points in a city, not that kind of a building, not that building. You don't take up, we were insistent, see, that San Francisco stop taking away streets and giving them to private usage. That's the public realm. You do not give up streets.
Alan, just to reinforce this point, to make sure everybody understands, what do you mean by giving up the streets or taking away streets?
Vacating it, and it goes to the adjustment, the adjacent owners. They had bought the property on either side. They wanted the street. No, my position was no. You don't do that. The streets are important, especially alleys for service and stuff like that. The other was they proposed this is a giveaway for everybody, the park, a little park next to it. Have you ever been there? You can't get in at East Ave. That's classic. That's a classic thing that they do. So, in response, yes, I was opposed to it. Aside from which it's a crazy-ass building. It's truly a crazy-ass building. You know, there it is going like this. Hang some drapes. See what that does to the square footage of something that's limited to begin with. It's a crazy building. I mean, God wants to do a crazy building, let him do a crazy building. But that's the least of it. What was the other?
As I recall, I remember from years ago, I think you mentioned, did you actually have a meeting with the CEO or the chairman of the board of Transamerica about this building?
Yes, I did. And I had a meeting as well with the architect, famous architect.
Oh, William Pereira, I believe. But you didn't hold it against him the fact that he was a Los Angeles architect?
No, I didn't. Figure out his, by the way, his library, where is it? San Diego. San Diego. It goes like that. That's a crazy ass building too. That doesn't work. That building doesn't work either. But yes, I had a meeting, and one of the things they said, gee, I wish we'd talked beforehand and figured something else, but now I'll have a face. I can't, we can't go back. Oh, and one of the things about that building, they wanted to be a little bit taller than the Bank of America. That was a reason for that building. Everybody now, it's an icon in San Francisco. Can't get away, it's an icon. Yeah, I think it was a mistake. I don't like it. Never will. But talking about Market Street, the Market Street plan came at the time that BART was being built. And so the idea was going to be to take streetcars from Market Street. That seemed like a good idea. And then Market Street was to be used for both vehicles and people. And a plan was done, a lot of landscape, trees never properly planted. simple, good plan was done. And then somebody got a bug to save the old streetcars, put them on back on the street. From all over. They're the same streetcar, except for a few old ones. They're basically the PUC streetcars that we reused all over the country, except the ones that they refitted that came from Milan and a couple of old San Francisco streetcars. And those now go right down San Francisco, and they have become an icon. And they help screw up markets really. They,
What do you mean by how did they screw up Market Street?
Well, because it takes so much of the right of way, and you need buses on the street because buses from all over focus, and you need buses, and they can barely get out. Ultimately, they will get rid of the most of the cars. Most of the cars are going now, but they'll get rid of more. But taxis are important. It should be a transit go street and bike go street. But it isn't. And the streetcars also have a problem in that our PUC has a bug about that is crazy and not very good boarding. The weight of the air, you can't get on them, and they take space. They take up a lot of space in the right of way that could be used for something else. So, a new plan, they're talking about a new plan, and I was recently on a committee working on it, and that has been disbanded, I gather. But what you need there is a transit go street. That's what you really have to do. And in all honesty, find either a special place for bikes, or put the bikes onto Mission Street, one street parallel, because the bikers go like hell, and they hit pedestrians and kill them. The bikes, bad. So that's.
Let me come back to the Transamerica building and tie this into something you were talking about yesterday in front of another student audience. Yesterday, Professor Jacobs made a comment about what I would describe as the limitations of being nice. For the landscape architecture students in the room, it was a comment he made relative to landscape architects and the tendency to be nice. And I'm going to ask him to extrapolate, to expand on this a little bit here, but in the context of the story about the Transamerica building and other projects you were involved in, you sometimes had to fight, whether it was fighting a mayor, fighting a real estate developer, fighting neighborhood groups sometimes. And I'd like to ask you to talk about, with examples from your past career, when did you figure out when to fight, and when did you decide it wasn't worth fighting? And can you give some examples of when you did have to fight for something you believed in? How did you decide how far could you go in fighting? And I'm putting this in the context of this general comment you made yesterday about the tendency to be nice, or the limitations of being nice. And have there been times in your career when you have not been nice? And when do you figure out when is the right time to not be nice?
Great question. When I moved to San Francisco, I always thought I was the next guy before that. When I moved to San Francisco, I think I became not nice right away. San Francisco, I think I became not nice right away. As a matter of fact, now that I say that, when I came to San Francisco, the plan had been unveiled for the Embarcadero center of San Francisco, the high buildings down near the waterfront. And Portman had designed it. And I was coming to San Francisco on a 10-day visit because I was still teaching in Penn. And they took me in the museum, Museum Modern Art at the time, to see the proposal. They took a look at it, and then they explained it to me, a big model of it, and I said, right off the bat, I don't understand why this building is like that. Well, it should be extending in height as it goes to the waterfront, not going up as it goes to the waterfront. And something about a street that they were taking out. And I made just a brief comment, and I said I'd look at it more. And Portman was there with the head of the redevelopment agency, Justin Herman. And Portman said, "Thank you," he said, I'm not terribly interested in your opinion." And I screamed at him. It just came out. I just screamed at him. As long as I'm the planning director of this city, you fucking well care about mine. I just screamed at him. A friend of mine was in a gallery way the other way, and a few days later, I heard you down there. So I guess some madness started then. It's been, on the other hand, we were doing work out in the South Bay Shore. People were scared to death that was going to lead to redevelopment. We were doing, my staff had already started a neighborhood plan. And I learned there, you better listen. You listen and listen and listen, and understand that you have to do things that meet people's concerns. And we did that. I used to go to meeting after meeting after meeting. And one of the things I found out is that people really wanted to voice their concerns to the head of the department, because heads of department often didn't go to those meetings. They sent underlings. Well, I thought I should go. And I became friends with those people. We became friends. But there were fights that way too. There were fights. One night, just on procedures. One night we were talking in South Bay Shore about we were talking about the commercial area of South Bay Shore. And there were a lot of people there. And at one point, some kid, young man, raises his hand and wants to talk. And I said, I'll call you in a minute. I'll be finished with our presentation in a minute. And this lady had raised her hand first. She'll be first, and then you'll be second. And he says, no, I want to talk now. And I said, no, that's not the way the meeting is run. I'm running the meeting. He says, this is my community. I said, well, it's in the library. We're in the public library, and I call the meeting. So I set the rules of how it goes. And before you know it, he stands up and starts walking toward me. And like a fool, I begin to walk toward him. And before you know it, I can see, you know, because the adrenaline is working, I can see every pore in his face and every whisker coming out of his pore. That's what adrenaline is. And he says, I'll show you. He screams at me, I'll show you whose communion this is. I'll go across to the bar and get my friends and I'll show you whose communion this is. I'm like an idiot. I don't want to fight you. I really don't want this to fight. Like an idiot. I said, I'm not interested in your talk, wise guy. I'm interested in your action. And he walks up. He walks out. And I said, oh my God, what do I do? A couple of my staff were there, and I tried to communicate to the staff through, you know, telepathically, or whatever, through telepathy. Your director is about to get killed. Go call the police. They didn't get the message. I understand that. But the guy came back a little while later and stood at the back of the room, and nothing ever happened at all, except on New Year's morning, they found that guy's body on the shoreline around Candlestick Park. He had been dealing big time in drugs, apparently. I'll never forget. Adam Rogers was his name, and he got killed. The next meeting of the South Bay Shore meeting, I was scared to go to the meeting. This was before anything happened to him. But I did notice a guy standing in the back of the room who had his, put it this way, his forearms were bigger than my head. And I thought, oh, this is where we get it. But it turned out he showed up in all the other meetings, and nothing was ever said, but I know damn well he was there. And that was the community. The community provided him. Okay. With the mayor, the big answer to your question